For as the light of the morning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, and covereth the whole earth, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Therefore sanctify yourselves, that your minds become single to God, and the days will come that you shall see him. For he will unveil his face unto you, and it shall be in his own time, and in his own way, and according to his own will. This is Unveiling Jesus Christ.
Hello and welcome to another podcast on Unveiling Jesus Christ. I'm John Casanet, and if I had to give a name to this podcast, I would call it The Translation of the Lost 10 Tribes Mirrors the Translation of the People from the City of Enoch. Now that's kind of a long title, but you get the idea. As promised, this podcast will talk in detail about the translation of the Lost 10 Tribes. If you've been listening to my prior podcasts, the translation or the concept of a translation of the Lost 10 Tribes is certainly not going to be a new concept, but there may be some of you who are still trying to get your arms around the concept. It should be no more difficult to believe and have faith that the Lost 10 Tribes were translated than to believe and have faith in the concept that the city of Enoch was translated. As we will learn in this podcast, there are many similarities and parallels between the translation of the Lost 10 Tribes and the city of Enoch. For the nutshell version of this podcast, you can check out section 154 in my book that you can find at my website on unveilingjesuschrist.com. Now, I said a moment ago that the translation of Enoch and his people and the translation of the Lost 10 Tribes are similar, but there's more to it than that. Their whole history is virtually the same. They are mirror images separated by thousands of years. Consider this quote by Hiram Andrus, who said, "A direct correlation is made in the pearl of great price between the program of the Lord that was carried out before the flood and that which is designed to be accomplished in the last days. In that early day, a prophet was sent in the person of Enoch with a special commission to fulfill the Lord's purposes. The righteous were gathered and taught the law of Zion. Having been sanctified, they entered into the rest of the Lord, and their city was translated. And finally, the wicked were destroyed. Similarly, in the latter days, a prophet has been sent in the person of Joseph Smith, and through him a program of gathering the elect has been instituted. Zion is to be built up according to the heavenly pattern and design, and in this way the saints are to be sanctified and enter into the Lord's rest. At the coming of Christ in glory, the latter-day Zion is to be caught up to meet him in the clouds. Finally, the wicked are also to be destroyed, this time by an envelopment of the earth in fire, the fiery floods of glory that are then manifest." Close quote. Now, I would add as an appendage to this that in the last days, a prophet in the person of John, and through him a program of gathering the lost 10 tribes was instituted. Zion was built up among them according to the heavenly pattern and design, and in this way they become a sanctified people capable of entering into the Lord's rest at the time of the second coming. And then everything else that Hiram Andrus says applies to the lost 10 tribes, just as it applies to us as a Zion people in the latter days. So now let's talk a little bit about the parallels between the people of Enoch and the lost 10 tribes. Both groups went from a state of great wickedness to a translated condition, as I talk about in my podcast from May 25 of 2025. In that podcast, I spoke of the wickedness of the northern kingdom, which was carried away to Assyria to become the lost 10 tribes. Moses 6:27 talks about the wicked people who became the people of Enoch, but the same words could apply to the lost 10 tribes. It says, "And when he heard a voice from heaven saying, Enoch, my son, prophesy unto this people, and say unto them, Repent, for thus saith the Lord, I am angry with this people, and my fierce anger is kindled against them. For their hearts have waxed hard, and their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes cannot see afar off. Close quote. Now, you recall from John's little book Mission, we're told that when he tasted it, it was sweet in his mouth, but bitter in his belly. This sounds a lot like what we're learning here about Enoch's dilemma in Moses 6:27, of dealing with a hard-hearted people whose ears are dull of hearing and their eyes cannot see afar off. I like this phrase that they cannot see afar off because it means that they are short-sighted. They have only their physical appetites and pleasures in their immediate future in mind, and they are blind to long-term spiritual blessings and consequences of living the gospel. Elder Delbert L. Stapley talks about the transformation and translation of Enoch's people, saying, Enoch and his people were in an abominable state of wickedness. They had all gone astray from the teachings of their fathers. Enoch had accepted the challenge of turning the people from their evil ways unto the Lord. He did it so effectively that God translated and received them up unto himself. Close quote. Thus we learn that the people of Enoch were taken into the bosom of God in heaven, as recorded in Moses 7:47 and 69, saying, And behold, Enoch his soul rejoiced, saying, Through faith I am in the bosom of the Father, and behold, Zion is with me. And Enoch and all his people walked with God, and he dwelt in the midst of Zion. And it came to pass that Zion was not, for God received it up into his own bosom, and from thence went forth the saying, Zion is fled. Close quote. Zion included the converted people taught by Enoch during his 365-year ministry, as well as many generations of righteous people up to the time of the flood, as were told by Bruce R. McConkie in The Mortal Messiah, saying, Thereafter, from the time when the people whose name was Zion were translated until the day of the great deluge, the converted saints had no earthly city to which they could gather. And so, as the divine record recites, for generation upon generation, the faithful saints were translated and taken up into heaven to associate with others of like spiritual caliber in that Zion which God had taken into his own bosom. The Holy Ghost fell on many, the account says, and they were caught up by the powers of heaven to Zion. Close quote. Enoch and the city of Zion are the prototype. Everything that is said of them before the flood could be said of the lost 10 tribes after the flood. The future of Enoch's people as a translated people and the future of the lost 10 tribes as a translated people also converge at the second coming, when Christ gathers all things together in one, both in heaven and on earth. John Taylor spoke of this future day, saying, It is called the dispensation of the fullness of times, wherein God will gather together all things in one, whether they be things in the heavens or things in the earth. It is a dispensation in which all the holy prophets that ever lived upon the face of the earth are interested. They prophesied about it as the grand and great consummation in the accomplishment of the purposes of God. Close quote. Elder Neil A. Maxwell also spoke of the future convergence of the lost 10 tribes and the people of Enoch, saying, The valley of Adam-ondi-Ahman will ring again, this time with the sounds of dispensational reunion as it glows with the gathering. Those of Enoch's utterly unique city of one heart will greet those of the new Zion, with holy embraces and holy kisses amid the sounds of sweet sobbing. The hills shall tremble at the presence of the lost tribes, and hearts, as well as ice, will melt as they come filled with songs of everlasting joy. Close quote. David Galbraith also adds that a unique and extraordinary temple will occupy the dedicated grounds of Zion, the New Jerusalem. The 10 tribes and the city of Enoch will return. Close quote. Elder Maxwell and Brother Galbraith make it sound like the road to the second coming is identical for the people of Enoch and the lost 10 tribes, as they should, because their journeys are highly similar. Donald W. Perry also connects them even more directly, saying, This passage, and he's referring to Doctrine and Covenants, section 133, verses 26 through 24, gives an impressive description of the miraculous return of the lost 10 tribes of Israel. Just as Israel was led from Egypt by great miracles, so will the 10 tribes return through miracles. Prophets will smite the rocks with power. Ice will flow down as they pass through. A highway will emerge from the ocean. The enemies of Israel will fall victim to them. Deserts will flourish with water, and the hills will tremble at their presence. Such a display of power is also reminiscent of that exercised by Enoch. He successfully led his people against their enemies. When he spake, the earth trembled, and rivers were turned out of their courses. Close quote. At the second coming, inhabitants from the ancient city of Enoch, that is Zion, and those from the New Jerusalem, which is also called Zion, in Jackson County, Missouri, will become as one. Remember, the lost 10 tribes are among the builders and protectors of New Jerusalem during the 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation, as I discussed in my podcast on May 4th of 2025. So, without identifying the lost 10 tribes as builders and protectors of New Jerusalem, Bruce R. McConkie said, "All this is part of the second coming. We shall build a New Jerusalem in Jackson County, Missouri, and Enoch's city shall descend and join with it." Close quote. James Talmage also said in the Articles of Faith that great events are to mark the latter days. The elect are to be gathered from the 4 quarters of the earth to a place prepared for them. The tabernacle of the Lord is to be established there, and the place shall be called Zion, a New Jerusalem. Then Enoch and his people are to return to earth and meet the gathered elect in the holy place. Close quote. At the second coming, Enoch's city of Zion and all the people translated before Christ will descend with Christ from heaven, as reported in Moses 7:62 through 63, saying, "Righteousness and truth will I cause to sweep the earth as with a flood, to gather out mine elect from the 4 quarters of the earth unto a place which I shall prepare, an holy city, that my people may gird up their loins and be looking forth for the time of my coming. For there shall be my tabernacle, and it shall be called Zion, a New Jerusalem." And the Lord said unto Enoch, "Then shalt thou and all thy city meet them there, and they will receive them into our bosom, and they shall see us, and we will fall upon their necks, and they shall fall upon our necks, and we will kiss each other." Close quote. John Taylor spoke of the uniting of Enoch's Zion with latter-day Zion during the time of latter-day calamities, which includes the Battle of Armageddon, as I discussed in prior podcasts. John Taylor said that when the time comes that these calamities we read of shall overtake the earth, those that are prepared will have the power of translation, as they had in former times, and the city will be translated, and Zion that is on the earth will rise, and the Zion above will descend, as we are told, and we will meet and fall on each other's necks and embrace and kiss each other. Close quote. So let's recap a little bit about what's going to happen during Christ's first appearance at the New Jerusalem at the time of the second coming, and probably this will occur at the temple dedication for the temple in Jackson County, Missouri. So what we have essentially are the builders of Zion and the builders of the temple, including the lost 10 tribes, all of whom will be at New Jerusalem. This includes mortal citizens like you and I are right now, who have gathered to New Jerusalem to redeem Zion. People such as us, who are living at the time of Christ's first appearance of the second coming, will be quickened, transfigured, and some will be translated. All those who are still alive since the time of Christ will ascend to meet Christ. The lost 10 tribes will ascend in their translated condition to meet Christ. Then we also have the righteous dead, those who are exaltation worthy, who will resurrect as their graves are open, and they too will rise up to meet the coming Christ. With all of these people rising up, we also have some who are descending. Christ will descend with the resurrected people from the city of Enoch, including all persons resurrected with Christ in the meridian of time. So that's what's happening during Christ's first appearance of the second coming. And all of this is talked about in Doctrine and Covenants, section 84, verse 100, albeit with less detail, saying, "The Lord hath brought down Zion from above. The Lord hath brought up Zion from beneath." Close quote. Yeah, so we're missing a few details there. But Hiram Andrus quotes this verse and explains further that the reference to Zion coming down from above will be fulfilled in the coming of the heavenly hosts who obey the celestial law, including the city of Enoch. The fact that Zion is brought up from beneath has reference to the translation of the latter-day Zion at the time of Christ's coming in glory. Close quote. All these groups that I've been talking about will all be joined together with Christ in the clouds of heaven above Jackson County, Missouri, as recorded in Doctrine and Covenants, section 88, verses 95 through 98, saying, "Immediately after shall the curtain of heaven be unfolded, as a scroll is unfolded after it is rolled up, and the face of the Lord shall be unveiled. And the saints that are upon the earth, who are alive, shall be quickened and be caught up to meet him. And they who have slept in their graves shall come forth, for their graves shall be open. And they also shall be caught up to meet him in the midst of the pillar of heaven. They are Christ's, the first fruits. They who shall descend with him first, and they who are on earth and in their graves, who are first caught up to meet him, and all this by the voice of the sounding of the trump of the angel of God." Close quote. This event is further recorded in Doctrine and Covenants, section 45, verses 44 and 45, saying, "And then they shall look for me, and behold, I will come, and they shall see me in the clouds of heaven, clothed with power and great glory, and with all the holy angels, and he that watches not for me shall be cut off. But before the arm of the Lord shall fall, an angel shall sound his trump, and the saints that have slept shall come forth to meet me in the cloud." Close quote. Now, this verse includes a very interesting statement that before the arm of the Lord shall fall, an angel shall sound his trump to awaken the saints that have slept. In other words, those who are dead at the time of the second coming, meaning dead and righteous. It's the righteous dead, not everybody. So the arm of the Lord in this verse represents the power of Christ that he will exercise in the final consummation that will destroy all wicked nations. Now note the timing. Before the destruction of all wicked nations, the angel sounds, and the saints who are dead will awaken. They will be resurrected to participate in the events I've just described in Jackson County as part of the first appearance of Jesus Christ at the second coming. This confirms what I and others have said before, that Christ will make his first appearance at Zion in Jackson County, followed by his second appearance to the Mount of Olives, when the Gentile nations and other wicked people in that immediate vicinity will be destroyed and an end will be made of Armageddon. This will then be followed by his third appearance in all the world, when there will be this final consummation and destruction of all nations. That's when it will be complete. That's when the arm of the Lord will fall fully and completely. And all of that happens after Christ has already appeared in Jackson County, as we are told in this verse, saying, "Before the arm of the Lord shall fall," in other words, before the final consummation, the angel's going to sound, and we have saints awakening in Jackson County, Missouri, and in all the world, frankly. Okay, coming back to the events that play out at the New Jerusalem during Christ's first appearance of the second coming, we have the scene symbolically described as a scroll that is rolled together, as indicated in Mormon chapter 9, verse 2, saying, "Behold, when the Lord shall come, yea, even that great day when the earth shall be rolled together as a scroll, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. Then will ye say that there is no God? Question mark. And close quote. The same imagery is found in Isaiah 34:4, which says, "And all the host of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled together as a scroll, and all their host shall fall down, as the leaf falleth off from the vine, and as a falling fig from the fig tree." Close quote. The imagery about the roll or the scroll is twofold. So let's first understand what it is that we're talking about in terms of what this scroll is that's supposed to roll together. Albert Barnes describes one aspect of the imagery, saying, the word scroll here, and he's speaking of Isaiah 34:4, means a roll or a book. Books were made of parchment, leaves, etc., and were rolled together instead of being bound as they are with us. The figure here is taken from what strikes the eye, that the heaven above us is an expanse, which is spread out, and which might be rolled together and thus pass away. Close quote. It is a fact that at the second coming there will be a new heaven and a new earth, and all old things will be done away with. In addition, we also have Zion coming from below and Zion coming from above, rolling together like a scroll and coming together. That's the second part of the imagery of this roll that gets scrolled together at the time of the second coming. So now let's return to a discussion of Enoch's people in the ancient city of Zion, who were converted and translated as a type or pattern for others, including most specifically the lost 10 tribes. The Lord said in Doctrine and Covenants, section 52:14, "And again, I will give unto you a pattern in all things, that ye may not be deceived. For Satan is abroad in the land, and he goeth forth deceiving the nations." Close quote. Robert Millet discusses Enoch's translation as a pattern, saying, Enoch's society became the pattern, the prototype for all faithful men and women who lived thereafter. The Apostle Paul could therefore write of Abraham as one of many who looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Close quote. Frankly, we're still looking for the same pattern in our future, when saints of the modern Zion will be translated at the time of the second coming, just as saints of ancient Zion were translated before the prototypical flood. Now, I refer to the flood as a type or prototype of the second coming because both involve a cleansing of the earth, one by water and one by fire. So we probably have a pretty good grasp of types and prototypes, but the concept is well explained in Easton's Bible Dictionary, which I share with you, saying, the Greek word tupos is rendered print. It properly means a model or pattern or mold into which clay or wax was pressed, that it might take the figure or exact shape of the mold. The word type is generally used to denote a resemblance between something present and something future, which is called the antitype. Close quote. So from the mold of ancient Zion, we have the modern equivalent as described by Hugh Nibley, who said, when Zion descends to earth, it must be met by a Zion that is already here. Note that Zion is eternal and a universal type, and that the local Zion, while made of the substances of this earth, shall come forth out of all the creations which I have made. Close quote. The translated Zion of the past is the goal or model that we seek today. If you're alive at the time of Christ's first appearance of the second coming, you better be hoping and living your life so that you're worthy to be among the translated people received up into the clouds at the time of Christ's second coming. John Taylor spoke of this future eventuality, saying, everything that the people of Enoch had revealed to them pertaining to the organization of the Church of God, also pertaining to doctrine and ordinances, we have had revealed to us, excepting one thing, and that is the principle and power of translation. That, however, will in due time be restored also. And if they in their day built Zion, we have one to build in our day. And when this shall be done, and everything is in readiness, the Zion, which the people of Enoch built, and which was translated, will descend from above, and the Zion of the latter days, which this people will build, will ascend by virtue of this priesthood and power, and the former and the latter-day Zion will meet each other, and the dwellers in both will embrace and kiss each other, so we are told in the revelations of God." Close quote. Consider this. If a translated Zion was the goal and model for Enoch, Melchizedek, and for us also, why would it not have been the goal and model among the lost 10 tribes, who converted as a people just like the people of Enoch and Melchizedek were converted, and then looked for their own Zion city, whose builder and maker is God? Think about the gospel dispensation among the lost 10 tribes as you listen to this quote by Blaine Jorgensen, who said, "The Lord has established several Zions on this earth, perhaps one in every prophetic dispensation. For Adam and Eve, in addition to the garden, which we are told was part of God's heaven, our first parents attained a Zion of their own. Therefore, the Holy One of Zion established the foundations of Adam-ondi-Ahman. Several generations later, Enoch gathered his righteous followers together in the name of the Lord, whereupon the Lord called his people Zion, and Enoch built a city that was called the City of Holiness, even Zion." Close quote. Now, in this quote by Brother Jorgensen, he, of course, leaves out the post-flood people of Salem, led by Melchizedek, who were translated and found that same city whose builder and maker is God. The Book of Mormon Reference Companion states that Melchizedek was king in a land called Peace, or Salem in Hebrew, which is traditionally equated with Jerusalem. The people of Salem were extremely wicked, but responding to Melchizedek's teaching and repenting of their abominations, they became righteous enough to be taken up to join the translated city of Enoch. Close quote. I would like to add, of course, to this list of copycats, the post-flood people we call the last 10 tribes. So, in addition to the foregoing, I have some additional likenesses and typology that exist between the translated people of Enoch and the translated people of the lost 10 tribes. So first, as we know, Enoch established his church among a people that became so righteous that they were translated and preserved from physical death during the flood. Those that remained wicked and refused to join Zion died in the flood. J. Reuben Clark spoke of them and their demise, saying, "The earth's people who were not of Enoch so increased in wickedness, became such a stench in the Lord's nostrils, that he resolved to destroy mankind and to begin all over again and bring a new race through Noah and his posterity. Then came the flood." Close quote. Joseph Fielding Smith further explained why Noah and his family were the only ones to have survived the flood, saying, "In his day the Lord gathered together all the righteous, and they with Enoch were taken from the earth, and later, before the flood, if any repented and accepted the truth, they too were caught up to the people of Enoch, so that when the time came to cleanse the earth with water, only Noah and his family remained of the righteous." Close quote. So let's apply this pattern to the lost 10 tribes. Christ established his church among the lost 10 tribes when he visited them as a distinct people after his resurrection in about 34 AD. Elder Russell M. Nelson spoke of Christ's visit to the lost 10 tribes, saying, "From the Book of Mormon, we read that Jesus was to visit the lost tribes of the house of Israel, to do for them, we presume, what he had done for others." Close quote. Hoyt Brewster reached the same conclusion I have, saying, "It is logical to believe that the Savior organized these separate and lost tribes under priesthood directions, just as he had done for the remnants of Lehi's colony as recorded in the Book of Mormon." Close quote. Thus we see that 60 years after Christ visited the lost 10 tribes and established his church among them, Christ appeared to John the Revelator on Patmos Island in 96 AD and gave him his little book mission as recorded in Revelation 10, verses 8 through 11. And you can find out more about that in my podcast from May 18th of 2025. So John's little book mission was an Enoch-like ministry among the lost 10 tribes. His mission began before the Great Apostasy could overcome the lost 10 tribes as it overcame the Nephites on the American continent. Now, most people in the church believe that the lost 10 tribes, after Christ's visit to them in 34 AD, also fell into apostasy as the Nephites did on the American continent. For example, Bruce R. McConkie set forth his view on this subject, saying, "What happened to the 10 tribes after the visit of the Savior to them near the end of the 34th year following his birth?" Answer, the same thing that happened to the Nephites. There was righteousness for a season, and then there was apostasy and wickedness. Close quote. Others who share this same view include Joseph Fielding McConkie, Victor L. Ludlow, Monty Nyman, just to name a couple. My next podcast will talk about why that is not the case, and my movie trailer for my next podcast is this. If the lost 10 tribes fell into apostasy, how could they return from the north as a righteous people to receive their temple covenants in Zion from Ephraim at the time of the second coming? Are there 2 restored churches on earth preparing 2 separate groups of people for the second coming of Jesus Christ? I don't think so. One thing is for sure. The Great Apostasy was universal in all the earth after Christ's visit among the Nephites and after his visit among the lost 10 tribes. James Talmage spoke of this universality, saying, "The last apostasy was general alike on both hemispheres. For nearly 2 centuries after its establishment on the Western continent, the Church of Jesus Christ flourished to the blessing of its members. Then followed disruption and apostasy, the bitter fruitage of sin, and so was fulfilled the saddening prophecy of Alma concerning the Nephites." Close quote. Donald Perry made the same observation, but included one significant exception in the following quote, saying, "After the crucifixion of Christ, the earth suffered a falling away from the truth, called the Great Apostasy. This apostasy began within decades of Christ's ascension into heaven and continued until all true believers of that dispensation had either died or were martyred. This same scene eventually played out in every locality that had the gospel, such as among the Nephites and Lamanites. The believers either fell away, died, or were persecuted unto death." Then he has a footnote 5. 4 righteous men we know of from ancient times were not killed: John the Revelator and the 3 Nephite disciples, all of whom were translated. But as translated beings, they apparently were no longer considered fully part of the mortal earth. And that ends the footnote. And then he adds, "The world slipped into the dark ages, a period of time when the gospel and its light were no longer on the earth among any people." Close quote. So Donald Perry says the same thing that James Talmage does, but he has a carve-out. The carve-out is John the Revelator and the three Nephite disciples, all of whom were translated. And he's exactly right, because once they were translated, they were no longer of the earth because their abode is in heaven, as I've described in prior podcasts. Now, to just expand that to the thought of the lost 10 tribes who were translated in their entirety. So we don't have just 4 people, we've got a whole mess of people, including others, holy men whom we know not of. The translation of righteous people among the lost 10 tribes preserved them from a spiritual and second death during the Great Apostasy, just as Enoch's righteous people were preserved from physical death during the flood. So do you get the connection? Do you get the parallel, the pattern, the type, the antitype, etc., etc.? The lost 10 tribes were preserved from death that awaited them spiritually because of the Great Apostasy, and so they were translated, and Enoch's righteous people were preserved from physical death during the time of the flood by their translation. Both are saved by translation, spiritually and physically, respectively. So that's one typology, likeness, or pattern between the translated people of Enoch and the translated lost 10 tribes. So let me give you a second example. Enoch prepared his Zion people for translation to a terrestrial state. I talk about that in my prior podcast from June 1st of 2025 that explains the condition of a translated people. But by way of recap and briefly, Hoyt Brewster gives this overview saying, the prophet Joseph Smith explained the special mission of Enoch in the doctrine of translation as follows. Now this Enoch God reserved unto himself that he should not die at that time, and appointed unto him a ministry unto terrestrial bodies, of whom there has been but little revealed. He is reserved also unto the presidency of a dispensation. He is a ministering angel, to minister to those who shall be heirs of salvation. Close quote. Now, if we want to apply parallel principles here, we could talk about the fact that John was appointed unto him a ministry unto terrestrial bodies. That is his little book mission from Revelation 10, 8 through 11. He is also reserved unto the presidency of a dispensation of the gospel among the lost 10 tribes. John is a ministering angel to minister to those of the lost 10 tribes who shall be heirs of salvation. So you begin to see the parallel that I'm talking about here. So the other thing that we know in terms of the parallel or pattern is that Enoch's translated people will return to earth as a resurrected and celestial people at the second coming. And this is explained by Bruce R. McConkie, who said, Enoch City, with its translated inhabitants, now in their resurrected state, shall return as a new Jerusalem to join the city of the same name which has been built up upon the American continent. When this earth becomes a celestial sphere, that great city, the holy Jerusalem, shall again descend out of heaven from God, as this earth becomes the abode of celestial beings forever. Close quote. So now, the parallel to the lost 10 tribes. John, like Enoch, ministered among the lost 10 tribes during his little book mission, as I have said, and as confirmed by Robert L. Millett, who also said, we know from the Book of Mormon and from modern revelation that John was translated, changed to a terrestrial state so as to no longer be subject to the effects of the fall, including physical suffering, bodily decay, and death. Like the 3 Nephites, he is still ministering among the peoples of the earth and will do so until the second coming of Jesus Christ, at which time he and they will be changed from mortality to immortality. Close quote. Now, Brother Millett made his comments somewhat generally about ministering to the peoples of the earth, and that's true. That is part of what John does, and that's specifically described in Revelation 10, verses 8 through 11, where he ministers to people, nations, kindreds, and kings. But we also have the Doctrine and Covenants, section 77, verse 14, that focuses a little bit more on the nature of his mission, specifically among the lost 10 tribes to prepare them to receive the ordinance of translation as discussed in my last podcast on June 1st of 2025. After the lost 10 tribes were translated, John continued to prepare them for their return to earth, just as Enoch and his people were prepared to return to earth at the time of the second coming. This is described by Hoyt Brewster, who said that prophets have been among the lost tribes is attested to in a statement made by the prophet Joseph Smith in June 1831. Joseph said that John the Revelator was then among the 10 tribes of Israel to prepare them for their return from their long dispersion. Close quote. The Encyclopedia of Mormonism adds that the Lord has said that the 10 tribes of Israel should also be revealed in the North Country, together with their oracles and records preparatory to their return and to their union with Judah, no more to be separated. And we know it. And the Encyclopedia of Mormonism cites as authority for this statement a proclamation of the 12 apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on April 6 and October 22, 1845. Close quote. Now, as I have said before, and consistent with what we just heard, the translated lost 10 tribes will come to the gathering at Adam-ondi-Ahman 3.5 years before the second coming. Check out my podcast from May 18, 2025 for more on that. So that concludes my discussion of the second parallel or pattern between Enoch's city of Zion and the lost 10 tribes. They both return at the time of the second coming, with Enoch's people, of course, returning in their celestial and resurrected condition, while the lost 10 tribes will return in their terrestrial condition, waiting for their temple ordinances after the second coming, and then they will receive their resurrection as well. So let me now conclude with a third typology, likeness, or pattern between the translated people of Enoch and the translated lost 10 tribes as follows. The people of Enoch and the lost 10 tribes were both translated to preserve the power of the priesthood on earth during separate times of extreme wickedness and apostasy. Joseph Fielding Smith spoke of the presence of priesthood on the earth in and through translated men, saying, according to the Pearl of Great Price, when Enoch was translated, the inhabitants of the city of Zion were also taken and were also translated. Moreover, the Lord, of necessity, has kept authorized servants on the earth bearing the priesthood from the days of Adam to the present time. In fact, there has never been a moment from the beginning that there were not men on the earth holding the holy priesthood. Even in the days of apostasy, and apostasy has occurred several times, the Lord never surrendered the earth and permitted Satan to have complete control. Even when the Great Apostasy occurred following the death of the Savior's apostles, our Father in heaven held control and had duly authorized servants on the earth to direct his work and to check, to some extent at least, the ravages and corruption of the evil powers. These servants were not permitted to organize the church or to officiate in the ordinances of the gospel, but they did check the advances of evil as far as the Lord deemed it necessary. We know that John the Revelator and the 3 Nephites were granted the privilege of remaining on the earth in the translated state to bring souls unto Christ. Close quote. Now, that might be a bit of a new concept to you, but this is what Harold B. Lee also said about that same principle, saying that the priesthood was preserved on earth via translated persons, saying, I walked over to the church office building with President Joseph Fielding Smith, and he said, I believe there has never been a moment of time since the creation that God has abandoned the earth to Satan. There has always been someone holding the priesthood on the earth to hold Satan in check. And then I thought of Enoch's city, with perhaps thousands who were taken into heaven and were translated. They must have been translated for a purpose, and may have sojourned with those living on the earth ever since that time. But these individuals were translated for a purpose known to the Lord. There is no question but what they were here. Close quote. Now, if we accept that translated persons have continuing priesthood presence on the earth so that Satan could never have complete dominion of the earth, as stated by President Smith and by President Lee, it makes perfect and logical sense that the lost 10 tribes had to be and were also translated. Now, keep in mind that the translated people of Enoch were resurrected with Christ in the meridian of time. They would no longer have a priesthood presence on the earth as translated people at the very time the earth was about to enter the Great Apostasy. So what's the solution? The solution is the translation of the lost 10 tribes after the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and they would become the successors to Enoch's translated people as priesthood protectors on the earth until the time of Christ's second coming, including the very, very long period of time of the Great Apostasy. So by way of reminder, Bruce R. McConkie taught that those who have been translated since the resurrection of Christ shall continue to live as mortals until the second coming, when they shall receive their immortal glory. Close quote. So speaking of John's continuing role as a translated person on earth, Hoyt Brewster has written that John's mission was to continue as a ministering angel to the inhabitants of this earth until such time as he would be called upon to lay down his terrestrial, translated body and take up a celestial body. At least a portion of this continuing ministry has been spent with the lost 10 tribes, for such was prophetically proclaimed in June 1831. Close quote. Thus we see that just as the translated people of Zion in Enoch's time were an unseen priesthood presence on earth before the time of Christ, so the translated lost 10 tribes have been the unseen priesthood presence on earth throughout the Great Apostasy and up until and including the second coming of Jesus Christ. So, by way of conclusion, I mentioned before that the lost 10 tribes did not fall into a state of apostasy and wickedness during the Great Apostasy as did the Nephites. So it would be hard for them to be an unseen priesthood presence on earth if they were in a state of apostasy. I also told you that my next podcast would show that they did not fall into apostasy. Now, the source of my knowledge on this point comes from the allegory of Zenos in the Book of Mormon and the 37th chapter of Ezekiel, which I will talk about in my next podcast. So until then, thanks for watching, listening, sharing, and subscribing, and to Jen and Kristen for all their help in putting this together. I'll see you next time on Unveiling Jesus Christ.